I'm not saying any of this is bad, by the way. I love technology. I love my phone. I love highways. I love consuming, okay? It's just that people use that, or the systems itself are reinforcing the oppression that you experience and normalizing it through that process. I love, okay, this channel's actually pretty fire. CCK Philosophy. This could be a very good video.
A murderer known as the Golden State Killer was caught by the police, having his DNA information discovered by looking through the databases of GED Match, a website in which people volunteer their genetic.
It kind of sucks that he's like recording this from a bathroom, though. I do like CCK Philosophy. I used to watch their shit all the time. It's just that, like, you know, not the highest quality
Codes in hopes of finding relatives and ancestors. The same year in June, it was discovered that Facebook's algorithms for advertising categories had included a category for people who might be interested in treason against their government. This year, in April, a tweet went viral when a woman was wondering how an airline at an airport was able to scan her face to determine she had bought a ticket when she had not consented for them to store any facial recognition data. What do all of these examples have in common? They're all examples of the fact that we live in a society of control. In 1990, philosopher Gilles Deleuze wrote an essay called Postscript on the Societies of Control, where, using a term borrowed from William S. Burroughs, he argued that we were entering a new type of society, a society of control. But to fully understand what this means, we first have to know what societies of control are contrasted with, namely Foucault's analysis of disciplinary societies, which in turn were contrasted with societies of sovereignty. In his book Discipline and Punish, Michel Foucault argued that with modernity came a new type of society, which he defined by the way in which such a society exercises power. Previously, in feudal times, the West consisted of societies of sovereignty. This means that the law was seen as the will of the sovereign, typically the king. Crimes were seen as attacks on the king, as infringements upon his will. Therefore, punishments were seen as a matter of revenge on behalf of the king, and thus typically involved the infliction of direct physical pain. But with the decline of feudalism and the rise of modernity came a new regime of power, the disciplinary one. Disciplinary society, whether in the school, the hospital, the factory, or the prison, made use of three main techniques: hierarchical observation, normalizing judgment, and the examination. First, people are hierarchically ranked with the purpose.
By the way, Another comparison I make between monarchies and capitalist neoliberal democracies that also bears repeating in this regard is the same ways that people justify living under that structure. Monarchies, theocratic monarchies especially, and the centralization of power that came from that was justified by God. It was God ordained, and the church had that control over your life, especially at a time when, you know, the printing press is not around. There's not a lot of ways to democratize education, and the things that you learn are very specific. You have a lot of holes to fill, and God filled all that hole. Now, and whenever, you know, whenever people wanted to justify the structures that they existed under, they basically said, you know, it's God. God ordained this man. And the church tells me that that is the best way to go about it. And I don't fucking know anything. You know, I'm a peasant. The fuck do I know? Right? I have a lot of fears. I have a lot of fears of what happens when people die. So, you know, I'm just going to go along with this system. Nowadays, we have more education, less, you know, more holes have been filled through the scientific method. We have no need. We don't have the same need to contextualize certain things or conceptualize certain things through the Bible or other kinds of, you know, other religious scripture. Okay? We have secular neoliberal democracies. How does a secular neoliberal democracy justify its own existence, where there is the same level of power disparity amongst those who have everything and the rest of the 99% that don't have anything? Because back in the day, it was the king. He had everything. You had nothing. You worked for your fucking lord, and then your lord worked for the king, and that was just the way it went. And you couldn't speak out against it because that was blasphemy, you know? It's blasphemy. Nowadays, we have a capitalist organization of the economy and a capitalist mode of existence. How do we justify that? Through the lie of meritocracy. Okay? So the disparity of power is still the same. Maybe not as extreme as like how it used to be during monarchies, right? They're not like cutting your fucking ear off or your hand off for getting a person in a position of power upset, right? Not that bad. But still, meritocracy is the reason why you look to someone like Elon Musk and say, yeah, nothing is fucked up here. He must have worked hard. The system, the entire system that we exist under has to be just. And it's a self-reinforcing cycle. It is a lie that everyone tells themselves. It is a lie that society was built upon to tell you that, like, no, if you do work hard, like, you will achieve the American dream. Look at all these people that did work hard and achieved it. Because if meritocracy is a lie, okay, if meritocracy is a lie, and those people in positions of power didn't actually work harder and smarter than everyone else to accumulate that level of capital, all of a sudden, why the fuck are you working? Why are you working so hard? You're never going to achieve that. If you recognize your permanent place in society, especially in countries, even in the Western world, where social mobility is becoming, less and less apparent, I guess. When you recognize that, when you recognize your class position and what you are born onto this planet to do, all of a sudden you might have a revolutionary spark. You get it? M. Hud is correct. I have a hard time believing Elon Musk has ever finished a single task the way Twitter is going / the way he tweets. Exactly. Scientific method doesn't exist for hundreds of years, Pepega. No, that's not what I mean. But obviously the great leaps that science has made, especially in the post-industrial world, or even with like a democratization of the flow of information, allowed people to have a different perspective. Another thing could be said about the internet as well, but I think capitalism is more powerful as a mechanism of control than monarchies were, and therefore, it is harder to. It has a capacity to bastardize every new invention and turn it on its head. No matter how much people want in their hearts to live a free life and yearn for emancipation, capitalism, especially neoliberal mechanisms of control, which this video is going to get to, have a very good way of normalizing the awfulness that you experience on a daily basis and tell you that the other systems are terrifying. There's no other way to go about it. Okay? Like, you watch the most socialist streamer and then you get a top of the hour ad break. Here's a 3-minute ad break now. There you go. That's how you go from Deleuze to fucking Foucault to serving a top of the hour ad break. Only here, baby. Nowhere else. All right.
Purpose of observing everyone's behavior. A significant function is carried out even by just the thought that you might currently be.
Oh, this is a good take too. In a monarchy, you could get executed for Sorry, you're saying in a monarchy you could execute the king for liberation. Doing that to Bezos or Musk wouldn't change anything. Yes. That is also true, but you didn't really get liberation from that either, though. To be fair, you still had to organize. You just had, and this is the argument that I guess this is what Noam Chomsky and Zizek also talk about within the two different mechanisms of control: the neoliberal mechanism of control versus the authoritarian mechanism of control that you saw within the USSR. When you know that you are being controlled, you at least have an understanding and you can organize against it. Whereas under neoliberalism, organization or an organizational power is diminished because you don't even realize that you're being controlled. Okay? That's it. So there is no organizing because you're like, well, what the fuck? Like, why would I organize to do anything? Things are great. Like, ultimately, I got a new TV this year. That's the main difference. That's why people, when they talk about China, will say, if Xi Jinping fucks up, no matter how much control Xi Jinping exerts over its population, okay? And the CCP certainly does a lot of that, okay? Chinese people understand the concept of Chinese prosperity, but they also understand the concept of the government controlling their existence in a meaningful way. Okay? So if there wasn't, if the Chinese government wasn't actually working towards Chinese prosperity in tangible ways that they can see and experience, then they would absolutely revolt against it. They have a history of doing so, and they would certainly do it again because they at least recognize that the government is controlling their existence, whereas here in America, we think we have freedom and we have no understanding of that, so there's no organizational need for it. Anyway.
Under observation. When you're at a store and you see a camera, there doesn't even need to be someone watching the footage. The possibility that someone is watching alone is enough for you to regulate your own behavior as if you are being watched. Then comes normalization. As your behavior is observed, it is judged as normal or abnormal, and abnormal behavior is discouraged and punished. In the old sovereign societies, criminal actions were mostly judged on whether they were allowed by the law or not, but disciplinary societies also judge whether it's normal. And this is done partly by examination, whether medical, psychological, legal, educational, or moral examination. Everyone is measured according to common standards and placed into categories according to the results. Foucault argues that the reason for the emergence of such a system is that it exercises power much more effectively. If you, say, stole something in a society of sovereignty, perhaps you'd be flogged or your hand would be cut off as revenge for stealing. However, in a disciplinary society, by teaching people to regulate their own behavior according to a standard, and by inducing the feeling of constant surveillance, you make it less likely that someone would want to steal in the first place. Not only that, but in a society of sovereignty, if you wanted to rebel against the regime, it would be very easy to identify who to rebel against, namely the king and those carrying out the king's will. In a disciplinary society, power is dispersed through a number of different institutions, and is thus harder to resist. Finally, in a society of sovereignty, when you see someone being tortured for a crime, it is easier to sympathize and feel sorry for the victim, and to rouse your anger against the regime. In a disciplinary society, on the other hand, institutions present themselves not as punishing, but as merely reforming individuals for their own good, and are therefore often not even seen as mechanisms of power. The way Foucault put it, societies of sovereignty tax production and rule on death, whereas disciplinary societies organize production and administer life. Let's take this point by point. Consider a serf working under feudalism. A common arrangement would be that the king owning the land sets a tax for how much of the serf's product he will take for himself. However, beyond this, so long as he'd produced the required amount, many aspects of the production process were actually up to the serf and his family. When to work and when to take a break, what technique, method, or tools to use, when to eat, what to wear, what room to be in, etc. The sovereign regime did not organize production, but merely taxed it. In a disciplinary society, on the other hand, production is, well, disciplinary. You are told when to come to work, when to take a break, when to eat lunch, what to wear, how to stand, how to behave, what techniques and methods to use, etc., etc. Depending on
this video totally just agree with your point about realizing who your master is. That's shocking. Shocking to me that he did that. This is true.
on your line of work, almost every aspect of your being can be decided by someone else. Thus, your work is not merely taxed, it's organized. Secondly, whereas a society of sovereignty ruled over death, issuing death penalties and deciding who dies when they commit a crime, a disciplinary society administers life, where it's not just death, but birth that is organized and controlled through the study and manipulation of birth-to-death ratios, rates of reproduction, the fertility of populations, and so on. The purpose of a disciplinary society was summarized by Deleuze as being to concentrate, distribute in space, order in time, compose a productive force. Schools, hospitals, prisons, barracks, factories, and offices all functioned according to this purpose: spatial enclosure, adherence to a schedule, and strict discipline. Understanding this, we can now ask what makes a society of control different. But keep in mind that Deleuze is not arguing that we have completely left behind disciplinary societies. He saw that we are in the process of transforming into a new one. Perhaps the most significant thing is that in the society of control, the exercise of power no longer requires enclosing people into spaces like the school, the factory, or the prison. Disciplinary regimes leave the tight enclosures of space and expand and permeate the entirety of society. Take phones, for example. It is no secret that your phone collects a lot of data: your GPS location, audio recordings, websites you've been to, and apps you've used. And it is also no secret that this data is often utilized by governments and corporations. What's interesting here is that in a disciplinary society, the exercise of power required to restrict your methods of communication. A society of control, on the other hand, tells you to please, by all means, have a phone and use it, because the more you use it, the more you can be surveilled, sampled, evaluated, and harvested for data. As another example, take airports that use facial recognition.
It is another similar, almost the identical argument is basically, I mean, this is not between monarchies and neoliberal capitalism, but like authoritarian forms of government, like what you would consider authoritarian forms of government, is the I guess what is it, communist dad, neoliberal dad? What is the Zizek argument? And the phone thing is actually perfect because like you now cannot even live without a phone, right? Like there is no. That's why we say like it's impossible to escape capitalism. You just can't survive in public. Authoritarian dad, neoliberal dad, which is you know, Breezy B97, thank you for the 5 get the subs. OnlyFans boyfriend, thank you for the 5 get the subs as well. I already served the top of the hour break. Chill. I hardly use my phone. It doesn't matter. That's ironic that you say that because, well, one, you're on Twitch already, and two, you don't need to use your phone for your data to be collected. And what is hilarious about all of this is that the mechanism of control is one that you have willingly subscribed to. Yes, I saw Zizek's recent trans takes. I don't care. He's like a old ass dumpster diving raccoon, man. Yeah, he's transphobic. I know. Like, what do you want? That's not what I'm talking about right now.
Recognition technology, something that is becoming increasingly more common. The more you fly, the more facial recognition data they're able to collect, as well as information about your transportation habits. Whereas a disciplinary society has to restrict your movement into tight spaces in order to monitor and observe you, a society of control encourages you to expand your movement because it means that there is more data that can be collected.
Voyez en quoi un contrôle, c'est pas une discipline. Je dirais par exemple d'un autoroute.
You do not confine the people, for example, but by making highways, you multiply the means of control.
Vous multipliez des moyens de control. Je dis pas que ce soit ça le but.
I'm not saying this is the only aim of highways, but people can travel infinitely and freely without. So here's the other thing. Listen. I'm not saying any of this is bad, by the way. I love technology. I love my phone. I love highways. I love consuming, okay? It's just that people use that, or the systems itself are reinforcing the oppression that you experience and normalizing it through that process, okay? And that's something that you always have to remind yourself of. Being confined while being perfectly controlled, that is our future.
The methods by which you are controlled and monitored are no longer perceived as methods of control at all, but rather as exercises of your own freedom. This is what makes societies of control so dangerous and so effective. When I buy a phone, make a Facebook account, do a DNA test, use a credit card, or go to an airport, I am doing all of it by my own volition. Yet by that very act, I'm increasing the power that institutions have over me. Once it is decided that I have transgressed the standards of some institution...
Stop! Never ask a French philosopher what they think of the age of consent, okay? Never do that. Do not do that. Do not ask that question. Also, not French, but where is Kant French? I don't even fucking know. What country is Kant from? He's German. Okay, don't ask Kant how he thinks black people are made. And don't ask any French philosopher what they think about the age of consent. Yes, you heard me right. I said how black people are made. Yeah, don't ask a woman her age, a man his salary, and French philosophers what the age of consent law should look like. Does being a racist invalidate one's other opinions? Depends. But if that was the case, then they would not be teaching Kant. Which, I mean, I am in favor of the abolition of the philosophy departments across the country. So for that perspective, yes, I do think that being a racist or talking about the arbitrary nature of age of consent laws should should immediately nullify her perspective, only because I personally don't like reading and I don't like philosophy majors for the most part, despite the fact that there's plenty of them in this fucking community. So I am on my anti-philosophy shit. I will never stop. Just because we're watching a philosophy YouTube channel does not change that reality.
It is very easy to then limit my freedom, place prohibitions on me, and punish me from a distance. To an increasing extent, we rely on things like electronic cards, internet accounts, codes, and mobile services, which can be shut off at any moment. Thus, the exercise of power no longer requires direct physical intervention. Instead, it can be exercised merely through the manipulation of flows of information. It is common for people to undermine the extent of this, but consider, for example, the fact that, at least in the US, your internet service provider collects your browsing data, and it is perfectly legal for them to sell it to both corporations and governments. The amount of US government requests for private Facebook data has been steadily increasing, with 34,000 requests in 2017. 85% of such requests were granted by Facebook without requiring you to consent or even be informed about it. Microsoft, Google, and Apple also all sent data about their users to the government, each granting more than half of government requests for such data. And it's not confined to social media either. As shown by the example of the Golden State Killer, if you have relatives who have used DNA testing technology, even if distant ones, there's a high chance that information about your genetic code is available to corporations and governments as well. And when I talk about control and power, I'm not just talking about being arrested as an enemy of the state. All institutions use such data for the purposes of control, whether in deciding what product to advertise for you, or in deciding whether they should hire you, or accept you into a given educational program, or even in making legal decisions that pertain to you. The significance of such forms of control should not be underestimated. But if control no longer requires enclosing people into defined areas...
He's making up some stuff here, lol. No, he's not. Everything he talked about is true. What do you mean he's making up stuff? What do you mean? What do you mean by he's making up stuff? What did he make up? He's saying we literally, personally tap into a mechanism of control. We are literally, we're saying, thank God for the surveillance state without even realizing it. He's just simply talking about systems of control, which is true. This is what we exist under. There's always going to be some form of control. Okay? That's kind of what a government does. That's what the existence of a government is, right? That's what it's supposed to do. It's just about who. It's just for whose best interest is that mechanism of control being doled out. Who gets to be controlled and who's doing the controlling.
What does this mean for institutions like schools, workplaces, and prisons? Deleuze's answer is that whereas in a disciplinary society you pass from one to the other, from the school to the barracks, from the barracks to the factory, in a society of control, you reside in several at once, at all times, not having to leave one to enter another. As Deleuze says, just as the corporation replaces the factory, perpetual training tends to replace the school, and continuous control to replace the examination. In the disciplinary societies, one was always starting again, from school to the barracks, from the barracks to the factory. While in societies of control, one is never finished with anything. The corporation, the educational system, the armed services being metastable states coexisting in one and the same modulation. In a disciplinary society, because institutions were spatial, at least you knew when you left them. You knew when you've left the workplace and were able to take a break from work for the day. But this is increasingly not the case in a society of control. Even when you're at home, you're expected to continue doing work, filling out papers, constantly checking your email and watching out.
That's why I always say under capitalism, every new technological achievement is not done to actually make people's lives easier, make the working class lives easier, but to extract more profits, more surplus labor value from the working class. The AI and automation conversation is yet another example of this very same argument. The invention of the fucking mobile phone and the internet creating a 24/7 work cycle is the exact same shit. That's the problem. The problem is not technological achievements. It's how technological achievements are used.
Out for updates and presenting yourself as a committed employee even in your personal life, especially on social media. You never really leave work.
I mean, yeah, also, it's the whole reason Ford made it so his workers could afford to buy the cars they created. I mean, even that fucking fascist understood that, which is ironic because we hail him as a champion of like workers' rights here in this country. But even he understood alienation, literally. Yeah, I said hail, which is funny when talking about Mr. Heil himself.
Some examples are summarized in the paper You Can Clock Out Anytime You Like, But You Can Never Leave by Peter Fleming and Andre Spicer. For example, sociologist Gideon Kunda studied a high-tech corporation in the US. The study, quote, revealed that the expectation for long working hours was built into the organization culture and was very difficult to resist once it had been internalized. The organization he called Tech attempted to appropriate as much time as possible from organizational members, and this could only be done if workers come to actively desire it themselves. The tech culture was designed to constitute this desire through various mechanisms of role embracement so that workers would think of themselves as tech employees all the time. As a result of this management approach, many employees found their family and home life suffered because they gave more and more of themselves to the firm and experienced burnout.
I get your point, but you can't place everyone in the same bracket. Certainly some people make inventions to make people's lives easier and not for profit. Wait, what are you talking about? Brother, you have fundamentally misunderstood what I've said. As a matter of fact, the idea that people make inventions exclusively for the profit motive is a capitalist idea. I do not believe that. As a matter of fact, everything I say is exactly the opposite of that. There are so many other principles, so many other motivating factors in people's lives. I'm saying that technological innovations are good. They're good because it's supposed to make our lives easier, and they do in some ways, right? But the unfortunate consequence, the unfortunate byproduct of living under a different organization of the economy, or the one that we live under currently, different to socialism or any other, whatever kind of fucking idea that you have personally. But the capitalism makes it so that all technological innovations are done for efficiency, which means, making you as a worker have more output and therefore fire other workers and getting more bang for your buck from the one person.
Role contradiction, and other kinds of pathologies. Indeed, even though workers endeavored to maintain some kind of spatial distance, many found that work and non-work aspects of social ties are experienced as hard to separate, requiring constant definition and redefinition, and are never fully resolved. And sociologist Catherine Casey studied an electronics manufacturer that had built a high-commitment culture. Casey's study concludes that it is not only the personal time of employees that is appropriated by the company, but also their identities, a process she ominously labels the corporate colonization of the self. When this occurs, workers become company people, even at home, and cannot think about anything other than their job and the well-being of the firm. Many of these employees were classified by Casey as neurotic and obsessive-compulsive because they have allowed the company to erode the identity boundaries that once separated them from the organization, and subsequent burnout as psychic anxiety and contradiction become too intense. Various phenomena, like working from home, working for school credit, wearing ankle monitors, using online doctors, attest to the fact that institutions no longer have to spatially enclose people in order to function. What counts is that we are at the beginning of something, Deleuze says. In the prison system, the attempt to find penalties of substitution, at least for petty crimes, and the use of electronic collars that force the convicted person to stay at home during certain hours. For the school system, continuous forms of control, and the effect on the school of perpetual training, the corresponding abandonment of all university research, the introduction of the corporation.
This guy just came back from Googling Henry Ford Nazi. This is so funny. Holy fuck, Ford was literally given an award by Nazi Germany, Keck W. I dropped that in the chat as a minor, brief footnote, and this man went in, Googled, came back, and he's like, dude, I should not have done that. That was a bad thing that I Googled. Sometimes it's better not to open certain doors. You know what I mean? Don't look up what kind of pamphlets he wrote and handed out either.
At all levels of schooling. For the hospital system, the new medicine without doctor or patient that singles out potential sick people and subjects at risk. In the corporate system, new ways of handling money, profits, and humans that no longer pass through the old factory form. Deleuze says that we are no longer individuals, but dividuals. The origin of the word individual means not divisible, something that cannot be divided. And disciplinary society consisted of such individuals, usually assigned a number in different institutions. But in a society of control, it is no longer true that we cannot be divided. We are constantly divided into demographics, marketing samples, survey results, statistics. It is through these aggregates of information that institutions view us. The number is replaced by the code. What's impressive about Deleuze's essay is how well, even in the early 90s, it was able to identify the trends that we are even more clearly moving towards today. What's important, however, is not just to identify such trends, but identify their dangers and new methods of resistance. Deleuze is not saying that societies of control are worse than disciplinary societies, or that disciplinary societies are worse than sovereign ones. There is no need to fear or hope, he says, but only to look for new weapons. Many young people strangely boast of being motivated. They request apprenticeships and permanent training. It's up to them to discover what they're being made to serve, just as their elders discovered, not without difficulty, the telos of their disciplines. And now I'd like to thank the individuals that support me on Patreon. 1108-4777-98641-4844, 1098-17628-01.
Okay, yeah, that was CCK Philosophy. Great video. What are societies of control? Great video from his bathroom that he filmed.